No. So I am very glad to introduce the second part of this conference with the presentation of Professor Pietro Saitta. Just something I want to say about his biography. Pietro Saita is Associate Professor of Sociology at the University of Messina in Italy. He obtains a PhD in Sociology from the University of Urbino. His main interests revolve around deviance, urban phenomena, and disaster. His latest book, in cooperation with Domenica Farinella, is The Endless Reconstruction and Modern Disaster, that was published in 2019 for Palgrave, on the making of modern social classes in Messina after a massive earthquake. So, Pietro is also a friend, colleague, and yes, we thought to make this invitation also for having a perspective about the catastrophe from a sociologist. So just not from architects or specialists of literature or philosophy. So we are very glad to have you here, also in this digital form. And well, extremely curious to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Gianfranco. Thank you for having me here or there. 30 minutes, right?
Yes, more 30 minutes, not more than 40. Well, if you're pleased, just for it.
Just to make sure. So thank you for your invitation. Yes, today I heard many interesting things that made me reconsider what I was to say, and try to put my talk in connection to what we heard this morning. So in short, I believe that there are two ways, at least two ways, of discussing phenomena as earthquakes and the like disasters in general. One is to choose, the local way, dealing with what an event meant for a community or for the place that got hit by the event. The other one is showing connections, showing how disasters or catastrophes or apocalypses take place within frameworks, meaning places are situated within nations, occupy a position within international order, take place within an epoch, which means an economic system, which is in most cases global or at least national or continental, take place within a political scenario. There is a local dimension and a national one as well, or even an international one. Of course, today, at least for European countries or for countries that occupy a specific position within this gamma of relations that connects places. So the way I chose, together with Domenica Farinella, my partner in writing, was that of reflecting on the meaning of the Messina earthquake within this plurality of networks, meanings, and forces that operate at the same time. and trying to show also the becoming of the event. I found very opportune, the necessity of um, distinguishing between uh, an apocalypse, a catastrophe, or other sorts of events. We felt the same need, in fact. Semantically speaking, we showed something different. I mean, we distinguished between a disaster and an undesired event that takes place in a given minute and is solved quite quickly, and a catastrophe understood as an event that never solves itself, whose effect lasts for a very long time. It's, after all, a nominalistic choice, perhaps, even though you showed today that it's possible to attach a lot of meanings, and a lot of philosophers spoke, about these terms and these concepts. So, regardless of the word we choose, we understand that there are events that are very quick, in solving themselves, and others that continue. So our idea was that, in a sense, that Messina earthquake has never ended. It's something that is still here because it affects certainly the memory, but it affects the geography of the city. It affects the political discourse. It's still used today when the city house and the national government are involved in a regeneration process that is not directly related to the earthquake, but at the level of cultural discourse, political perceptions, general thoughts are related to that event. So what is not correct in a technical sense is still true for the common wisdom or for the general understanding of phenomena. Just to make clear the point, Messina is home to some 86 shanty houses or slums, where some 6,500 people live. That is 2,100 households, more or less. So it's something massive. It's something that occupies, the geography of the city. And as I said, most of these shanty houses, most of these slums, are not related in any technical possible way to the earthquake, to the 1908 earthquake, but are in a way something that descends from a possibility, the possibility of living at the margins of the city, self-building, exploiting the interstices of the law, the welfare state, the provisions that the state over its process of making, of construction, provided to the people. So going back to our points, we believe that certain events continue to exist over the decades, continue to affect the lives of places. They do this because, as I said, take place within specific moments, that is, within political scenarios. So would have been the effect of the 1908 Messina earthquake the same should it had happened at another moment? This was the one of the questions. So our endeavor, our effort, was that of investigating those relations, the specific moments. We showed, for instance, as 1908 coincides with an early phase of the Italian state after unification. That earthquake becomes thus a performative space. That is a moment during which the state must show to a new population of Italians how effective it was. Indeed, it has been everything but effective, has been quintessentially unaffected, it has been a total disaster in managing the event. Nonetheless, what we see is that a machine starts to work, and this is a new one. It's a machine made of royals that come to visit the place. It's a machine made of newspapers that for the first time in recent history create an integrated system so that they could cover at an European level the event, could thus elaborate a new discourse on this city, which was quite central in the economy of the area until the earthquake hit the place, hit the city. Messina was a port, was a city that exchanged goods with most of Europe and even the States. Interestingly, together with the disaster that kills, by the way, some 60,000 people, between 60,000 and 80,000 people. So it shutters down the city seriously. You know, it's comparable to Lisbon in terms of material effects. What we see is the total rewriting of the city, which is quite interesting. That is, this integrated system of newspapers can do anything else than producing a narration that co-opts the city of Messina, this rich bourgeoisie and merchant city, within the social question. You know, that is that discourse, very foundational, very much at the basis of the Italian national discourse that identifies the South with backwardness, you know, with being beyond the borders of civilization. So this is politically and for the internal discourse also extremely interesting. The city starts to get affected by a problem of civility. For most people, I mean, people, inhabitants, people who survive, are described, for instance, as people to whom the death of a pet means more than the death of a relative, and similar discourses. So a discourse of animality, of bestiality, we might claim, which was quite new, you know, for this bourgeoisie class. At the political level, we also see some clear consequences. In that specific moment, Messina was on the opposition side, say that it was a city that had a weight, and quite an economic weight, but also a political weight. And in that specific moment, the local elites weren't very close to the national government. So this means that the city becomes a land of conquest for national political power. It's a city that is destroyed, of course. It's a city that is losing its importance, but nonetheless, it's a city that still has some wealth, some elites. It still has a weight in the political arena of the time. Moreover, there is this performative aspect I already mentioned. So we can see how politics starts to enter the reconstruction and the political discourse of the city. by providing new economic levers, financial levers, um, economic mechanisms that can help the city to be rebuilt, but above all, that can help some groups to regain some of the lost wealth. Yet, it's a moment during which urbanism is going through, new developments, new ways of imagining the city. It's something we already said today. So the idea is to build a new kind of city. It's of course the rational city. It's perhaps the garden city. It's a system of grid, but is above all a system that over the decades creates new geographies of class, geographies of poverty, of exclusion, perhaps, geographies of wealth. The classic idea, the Mediterranean city, so to say, if it never existed, if such a thing never existed, was that of a mismatch of classes. At least in the south of Italy, it's always been like that. But with this new reconstruction, over the course of a few years, it becomes clear that classes shouldn't be too close. So what you find is the process of relocation of shanties that occupy the very center of the city towards the margins of it. Something that will cross over the many next decades, the birth of projects, public housing, and this kind of coincidence between, the new houses for the poor and the older ones, which are not exactly the same in physical senses, but they occupy the same lands, are rebuilt several times at different moments, of the political life. But it's clear anyway that already after the earthquake, that the city can take the same social composition. So this way of, crossing modernity in terms of separation, social division. But it's also a time, the years after the earthquake, during which a new class of capitalists appears on the scene. If Messina was a city of merchants above all, or of land-related producers that produce and treat crops and other land products at a very high level and export them. After the earthquake, it becomes clear that the land is the new object of desire. So we have the transformation of a class of a bourgeoisie, from a bourgeoisie of the merchants and producers to a bourgeoisie of rentiers. So the new struggle is about land. And this struggle about land is also accompanied by technicalities related to the master plan, for instance. These are gains based, for instance, on heights. That is, new buildings shouldn't be taller than 2 floors, than 2 stories. So it means that you need new land. And then you play with property rights in a situation where cadastry are not there anymore, during which property rights are not that clear and can be passed without any real bureaucratic control. So you find that the disaster is a way through which certain classes become ever more powerful, new subjects exploit technicalities and try to promote themselves to rise, in the social ladder. And then you see a huge mass of people who are segregated in the lowest uh, steps of this imagery social ladder. So you see that disasters are also a way of projecting places into modernity. In a way, what we can draw, from the things I said so far, is that disasters like that are augmenters of reality. That is, moments that accelerate tendencies that are there, or are events that make modernity, quote unquote, modernity blow up, explode, appearing, in places that were still far from it in a way or in another. So I mean, Messina was a rich city, but who knows whether this situation would have lasted for very long. New ports had been built, for instance, in the island. So it was ready to become, the city was ready to become the third port of the city rather than the first one, and rather than perhaps the seventh or the 10th port of Italy. I don't remember, the position in the rank was something like that, at the very top. New infrastructures were causing change. Above all, the kind of production that the city was home to were kind of out of time, and heavy industry was developing all over Europe and even in Italy, in the north of Italy. So this kind of land-related productions were not very up to date. And of course, the decadence was behind the corner, so to say. The earthquake intervenes in this situation and accelerates the process. Yeah, even more importantly, this bourgeoisie, this local bourgeoisie, was already starting to play with financial tools, we would say today, with a new stock option market that was developing, certain operations related to financial value more than physical, things. So there were already the signs of a transformation. The earthquake comes and the transformation becomes complete. So the earthquake as an augmenter of reality in this sense. But as I already noticed, the earthquake is also something, or disasters, or actually catastrophes, are events that, when last for a very long time, as in the present case, intersects, cross different epochs, different political regimes. So it's interesting to see what happens when fascism comes. Actually, the Reconstruction knows an acceleration during fascism, meaning from 1908 to the early 1920s, the city was very slow. The pace of reconstruction was very slow. Fascism arrives on the scene, and it provides, most of these changes. For instance, this geography of exclusion becomes ever more clear with fascism. But it's interesting that this creates a sort of affection. These kind of interventions affects the way people perceive fascism. Because sure, they are segregated, but new, very economic, cheap buildings are also built. le casette di Mussolini, the Mussolini houses, which are very poor, but are still houses for a certain kind of people. There is a welfare state that comes on the scene, and together with welfare state, there are also figures of, let's call them brokers, political brokers, in the sense of patronage, in the sense of patronage. That these mediators that guarantee, consent in specific places for specific populations. And this thing starts with fascism. The success of fascism, of course, is not in the figure of Mussolini only, but rather in the apparatus that he can create and on which his action was based. And what is interesting is how this system of exchange, clientele, political clientele, sentiments, as I said, navigate, go ahead and cross the Republic. That is the years of Christian Democrats, the order that emerged from Second World War, which, by the way, has also been an apocalypse in a way. I mean, it has been a second earthquake because of bombings. So to the old social question, one should add the effects of the war, just to show how the shanty towns are indeed the effect of a stratification of causes that crosses the eras, that crosses political moments, that crosses wars. And what we find during this time, during democracy, basically, in the shift, in the passage to democracy, is the way shanties and shanty cities, shanty towns, become a kind of infrastructure of power, infrastructure of political exchange, that produces and crosses and is ordered, for instance, by mafia or powers that resemble very much the mafiosi ones. But one sees how this population becomes essential for its own reproduction, the reproduction of the city, its own self-reproduction, the reproduction of the city. For instance, these highly uneducated people with no skills become the manpower for what can be defined the most important industry of the city, that is the housing industry, the construction industry. And now the possibility given to them to work is related to their own fidelity, political fidelity to patrons, to clientele. So a system that reproduces itself in a perfect way, and that anticipates many of the facets of modern capitalism. This huge population of precarious workers, this huge population of people, of unskilled people linked to perverse relations to different centers of power, anticipates many of the tendency of modern capitalism. And it's interesting, this point that we argument in, I think, in a quite detailed way in our book. It anticipates those dynamics of precarity and control that huge masses experience in the modern world. So it's possible, in a way, to invert the discourse based on allochthony, that is, on populations and places that live in a era out of modernity, out of the current time, it's true. Perhaps Sicily, Messina were living in a kind of allochthonic time, but this allochthonic time was related to the future, not past, and the dynamics related to housing and buildings and the construction of the city was, where the elements that show this yeah this way of being ahead of time, so to say. Um, 30 minutes have gone faster than I thought. Just one more minute to say that Messina is still at the center, and its shanties are still at the center of the discourse because of a national law that promises to, how they say, to regenerate old old shanty towns. Uh, Indeed, we can see that this is a very complex game that promises to kill three with a rocket rather than three. Um, Reinvigorating all political ties and effects, as I say, creating a new slash old clientele of people who were disillusioned, by the past, by the fact that they never had an access to houses and stuff. Now that there are the money, now that there are funds granted, um, this goal, this objective becomes more tangible for many people. But of course, this implies fidelity to the current power and the current mayor, who is a populist, and so this allows to see how certain events take place, within political scenarios at the moment and populism in particular. Then these grants, these funds, are important because they are based on the idea that the city buys houses that are already built, apartments from private people. So it's something that creates an interest in the petite bourgeoisie and middle class in a time where the housing market is stuck. There's a crisis that lasts since the past decade. So creating new interest and helping a class which is crossing the crisis. And third one, helping the builders, because another part of this process of regeneration is based on building new houses. And so, like, you're helping all the lives of power, local power again, which are the builders. So as we see, certain conditions of precarity, certain situations of poverty, certain geographies of exclusion should be seen as mechanisms of self-reproduction, mechanisms that shouldn't be solved out, because within capitalism, they are part of this process of continuous recreation of power and relations. So more or less, this is my presentation, my communication. Of course, I've been quite quick, but I don't want to take much time. Run.
So thank you very much, Pietro, for this communication, this deep introduction to the history of Messina's earthquake, and above all, as your title said, about legacy, the paradigmatic legacy, somehow of Messina's earthquake. Well, I don't know if there are some questions here at the museum, or eventually also in the meeting, in the Zoom meeting. Well, Maria Filomena. Yeah, I don't know if we have the microphone, yes, or working, yes, okay, good.
For your paper. When you were talking, I was thinking about our situation, our...
I can't hear very well, I'm sorry.
You don't hear? Okay.
You do not hear?
I don't.
And now? No?
Now? Can you hear, Pietro?
It is better.
Yeah, I mean, to be frank, I can hear,
É
but not
melhor ir
very
para ali
well.
porque já há
Maybe
bocadinho ele não
maybe it's
percebeu.
maybe it's better. Maybe it's better. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Of course.
Thank you very much for your paper. When you were talking during, I heard you, I was thinking about our actual situation, our Ich und Nunc, and the pandemic problem we have. And some months after March here in Portugal, everybody talked about the new normality, and afterwards everybody talked about returning to the normality. And it is, and everybody asked people in newspapers and I suppose in TV also, how do you live this new normality? And next, are you happy because all the old normality is here again? And I fear that returning to normality is to returning to a terrible state of affairs. Even the word is not good. The new normality was a fake concept, I think. It is to stress the necessity of our lives have become more visible. Now you talk about Messina earthquake never ends, and the concept of normality and the disaster is, the idea of the disaster is not something that occurs and alters the states of affairs, must only accelerate a tendency that is always there but is not always faced, or their contour is not always clear in front of us. We don't see very well. And now we see better. There were hopes, strange hopes, I fear, when we saw images of cities where the animals who live near crossed the streets and that were void of people. And everybody applauded and thought that the next city will be like this. And it's false, this idea. It's like not a bad dream, as a bad film on a dream. Many people asked, and even asked me, if there were not now after this small disaster we had the experience. We don't know when it ends and where it ends, but if people get better or would get better or something like that. And it's very strange that people believe that a disaster, bigger or smaller, would provoke alterations of grand impact in our lives, really. It's strange that people believe in that, but I think that this is like a symptom of searching for an alteration that never occurs. They are trying to believe that will be an alteration, a modification that will never occur. It's like not a bad dream there, but a dream that never becomes reality. It is like it is not a question, but it's like the notes that I have taken when you were speaking.
Thank you very much. Oh, well, hope is very much the Christian legacy. I mean, much of our culture is based on this notion of hope and better future, and the son of it's so dell'avvenire. I don't know how to translate it in English. You know, that's the idea of a sun that will come. You know, so positive. And then I would be careful in distinguishing the discourse of the journalistical discourse, for instance, and the discourse of some activists and intellectuals, and the common discourse, because there we would find important differences in today's, drama we are all facing. This is very clear in Italy, where a drive, towards instability, chaos, lack of institutional trust, etc., bespeak not for hope for a better future, but as a deep unsatisfaction with the present, and the fact that the forces that drive this malcontent are basically the fascists or neo-fascists, if you will, or disguised fascists. Yeah, as I said, don't speak very much for trust and hope in the future. So I would distinguish at these two levels: the levels of activism, the levels of intellectuals, the level of those who have to write something, and the common man discourse seem very, very different. And here we are seeing Italy, at least we're seeing this happening, in a very clear way. And at this point, in fact, coming back to our original topic, I would look at certain phenomena, not in terms of hope, but in terms of resistance, and not resistance in the terms that you want to stay where you are because you hope that something better will happen. But resistance in the Latin sense of the term, which is staying there, because the place where you are, where you stay, it's the only one place where you can imagine to be, because anything else would be much worse. So you struggle to maintain the small position you occupy within society, because what will come next could not be that good, and all these tactics that people in the shanties, deploy for making a living, the production of an informal economy, the production of space, the fact that you invest the little money you have on your shanty and you try to improve it and you pass it from generation to the other, is part of this kind of realism, I believe. At least this was my ethnographic finding, that there isn't much hope for a better future. And if something will happen, it will happen by means of your smartness, by means of your capability of entering, the little gaps, the little holes that the system provides in those terms of welfare, popular houses given to people who have been in a shanty for a very long time, or jobs that are given to people who have been unemployed for a very long time. And so this is not really hope in the future, but mere realism. full of dramatic things, you know, full of dramatic aspects. I don't know if I'm clear. Thank you very much.
So just a little thing that I think can connect your intervention with the following one by Joana Cunha Leal. Just a note or remark about what you said concerning the paradigmatic meaning of Messina's earthquake. Now, as you noticed, when the earthquake happened, it was also it was used by the political power at the time. For instance, the monarchy. In a state that was just recently created at the Italian one, to produce a form of facing through the form in which this catastrophe was faced. Also, a form of power was created, or maybe legitimated, if you note other things. And it is not so different, but it seems to me, from what happened, for instance, in 18th century here in Portugal, when the enlightened monarchy, or enlightened the dictatorship of Marquis de Pombal used or was constrained to use Lisbon's catastrophe to build a form of power that until that time was not so legitimated here in Portugal. Well, just something about this. If you see as a specialist, yes, you wrote a lot of things, not just about Messina, Messina's earthquake. If you can see a sort of paradigmatic structure, no, of facing catastrophes. We spoke just in the lunch break about Gibellina, but we could speak about L'Aquila, for instance, the recent earthquake in L'Aquila too, with the powership of civil protection that was put in action and through, for instance, the emergency laws. So I don't know if you could or would add something more about this paradigmatic structure of facing catastrophes.
Well, if I look at different disasters I happen to study or to read about, you know, I don't think there is just one paradigmatic structure. There are a few. Very much is related to the position of a city within a nation. I mean, would the reconstruction of Lisbon been the same, whether rather than Lisbon, the city of the king, you know, was another minor center to be hit by the earthquake? So what forces were present? What that city meant for the monarchy of the time? We can see that, for instance, when we look at contemporary earthquakes in Italy. Think of the difference between the outcomes of the Central Italy earthquake of 2012, I believe. The second one after L'Aquila, which has been quite poor, right? And then think of the earthquake in Emilia-Romagna, which is one of the core regions of the Italian economy, in a moment during which the regional power and the national powers were basically the same, the Democratic Party. But above all, the importance of Emilia-Romagna within the national economy, right? Compared to the importance of Umbria or places like that in comparison. So the position of a place is something very, very important. Then what is important is also how certain events are explained, narrated, and told. And it's clear that these narrations are never unrelated from interests, are never disconnected from interests of some sort. But I think, for instance, how in a disaster like September 11th, today we've been discussing a bit about that, right? The area of the Twin Towers, it's called the Wall Street area, right? We see how the corporations were able to depict themselves and being depicted by policymakers as needy subjects. We see all of policies, all of economic interventions that treated corporations, I mean, huge corporations. We all know, what Wall Street means, right? And what kind of companies were hosted in the Twin Towers and the surrounding area. So these corporations were needy, depicted themselves, and were depicted as needy. Human beings, people who owned houses nearby, and these people happened to be poor, as we know, were totally out of the radar, of the scene. We see then the construction of elements, that need to be helped, that need to be assisted, and the disappearance of others. So one paradigmatic example, one paradigmatic trait, character, of this kind of events is how they interact with the humanitarian reason, just to mention, Fasson's category. The fact that there are all of discourses, a certain kind of logic, very, very much based on humanitarian principles that are continuously resignified. And sometimes this resignificance process is also kind of paradoxical, so that companies of billionaires can be described as a bunch of poor people in needs of assistance. So what I mean is that the power of nominating, the power of describing, the power of creating categories and being inserted within categories plays a sort of pivotal role, in this kind of events, I believe. And it's very much related to power, of course, meaning that the paradigm here is that disasters are those events that affect everybody but the powerful. I mean, the powerful are not really touched by the events. And when they are touched by the events, they certainly have the needs for, for coming out from the disaster, from the event, in the best way possible. This is the story as it goes, in my view, which is very obvious. Everybody knows that. You don't need an expert to know it. I don't know if I answered.
Yeah, we have just another question or two. No, one. Just a short question by Bartholomew. Yeah, it's better if you come here. We are just a bit late, so if you can be.
Thank you, Pietro. Very, very quick question then. I'm just curious what you said, when you said that disasters are ways of projecting places to modernity, and I agree with a lot of it. I was just thinking, can we make a distinction between a natural disaster and human-oriented disasters? Because I can think, when you mentioned New York there as well, that seems to be the could be argued to be the contrary, where it hasn't projected to modernity, rather it brought it back to a kind of pre-modern projection. And then a third type of disaster, when Filomena was talking about normality, of course this is the more abstract type, the kind of media disaster porn, which is almost, you know, asking for catastrophe. And you open the papers and all you see is catastrophe news. It's almost an addiction. So these three types, the natural, the actual warlike destruction of disaster, and then the third, which we're experiencing now, unfortunately, in extreme manner. Thanks.
Thank you. I love this observation. So you're right, totally right. Nevertheless, there are visions. So I mean, there are events. Well, even what's the name? COVID-19. It's a way of projecting us into a new modernity, to a modernity of, diseases, pandemic, the era of pandemics, the era of sustainable economy, and so on and so forth. I mean, this is a natural disaster, perhaps. I mean, this is natural disasters do not exist. This is my view. You know, it's always a combination of human and nature. I mean, Lisbon and Messina meaning something because there were cities, and cities that were built in a certain way. So you have an earthquake, which is a natural disaster, but where the city is built in a different way, most probably the effect would have been different. As in Japan, Japan is continuously hit by quakes as the ones who hit Messina and Lisbon, and there are meaningful effects. Well, sometimes yes, of course, Fukushima, but it was quite an exception if you look at the regularity with which, you know, certain events hit the area. So natural disasters do not exist. This is what I would claim. And if we come to this tragedy we are all facing, which is before us, even here we see that a certain idea of modernity is approaching. The era of epidemics, the era during which we have to develop a new type of economy, which brings about many costs in terms, in social terms. The fact that the transition economy generates an impact, costs on people, on producers, well, more on people than on producers, and so on and so forth. So I believe that when there are big events, you know, there is always like a new notion of what is up to date, what is modern, what is what belongs to the very present that comes to the scene, you know. And this moment is not an exception, I would say. Just, you know, this short observation.
Okay, thank you very much, Pietro, once more, and for having accepted also our invitation. And I give.